Señor Presidente.
Mr. President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Mr. Peter Thompson, Your Excellencies, heads of state and governments, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Costa Rica congratulates you on your election as President of this General Assembly, and we welcome the priorities you have set for your term. You have our full support for its fulfillment. We also thank the Secretary General on his efforts and especially his contribution to the cause of peace and sustainable development. 2016 is coming to an end with little progress made to solve the current crisis of refugees and migrants, the worst since the Second World War. Costa Rica reiterates the urgent need to assist, protect, and respect all human rights of those that have been forced to leave their homes in search of safety for themselves and their families as a result of armed conflict or violence, or natural disasters, or the effects of climate change which threaten their survival. We are not fulfilling our commitment to leave no one behind. Mass media and the international community have paid little attention to the tragedy of thousands of migrants traveling across Latin America from south to north. For Costa Rica, fortunately, from April to September of this year, more than 9,500 irregular migrants have crossed our borders, and we have granted refugee status to a total of 215 people during the first semester of this year. Thousands of migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Central America, Asia, and Africa travel our region. It's clear that this is a global challenge which requires global solutions, solidarity, shared responsibility, and comprehensive approaches. When discussing refugee and migration crisis, we must not only consider big migrations, as these do not take into account other forms of migration that continuously happen around the world. These take place illegally and are fueled by inequality, poverty, and other structural causes of conflict, fostered by international organized crime networks. Costa Rica, as a transit, origin, and destination of immigrants, has typified migrant smuggling as a crime in its domestic legislation against human smuggling and illicit trafficking of migrants since 2012. This legal framework also guides the design and implementation of national policies to address the migrant smuggling from the gender perspective. Such policy includes the following perspective: care and protection of victims, prevention, administration of justice, information gathering, analysis, and research, as well as institutional coordination. In our experience, facing migration flows and the need for humanitarian aid, we must acknowledge the role continuously played by civil society organizations as support networks for migrants and their families. In addition to their enormous capacity to document the situation in situ and deal with violations of human rights of smuggled migrants. Communities which have welcomed these migrants have showed their profound solidarity with those in need. This complex situation will only become more serious because of floods, droughts, rising ocean levels, which will force many people to be displaced within their own country as well as to migrate abroad. These challenges call for the virtuous ordering of the entire ecosystem of human mobility by means of a dialogue among processes, actors, mechanisms, and organizations. We must utilize resources efficiently and better coordinate with humanitarian and development organizations. This does not mean redirecting development resources to humanitarian assistance. If we did that, we would be creating a vicious cycle and fail to invest in the root causes of some of these mobilizations. We will continue to highlight the need to address the impact that migration has on women and the need to adapt public policies to address these particularities. We will also continue actively to call for action to combat gender-based and sexual violence. If we are simply feigning loyalty to laws and institutions, we better stop. If we imagine that mankind can survive along this route and that the show must go on, we will simply be digging the tomb of human species with short-sightedness and selfish. We must remember that it is not mere altruism itself, but for the crudest realities that we have chosen to have a global order ruled by institutions and self-regulation principles. The escalation of tensions, conflicts, and the use of force do not suit anyone except a few merchants who profit from suffering and death. The national interest of all states is to strengthen the international system and the United Nations, which is at the very heart of that effort. Philosopher and writer Albert Schweitzer said that to the question of whether I'm an optimist or a pessimist, I respond that my knowledge is pessimist, but my will and my hopes are optimistic. There are realities which make me hopeful. I'd like to thank Secretary General Ban Ki-moon for his invitation to co-chair the high-level panel on the economic empowerment of women, together with my colleague, Ms. Simona Scapalegia. The hard work of the panel has already produced a fruitful report, a draft, some of whose conclusion I'd like to share with you. I firmly believe that there is a great potential to be released by valuing and empowering women. The energy, power, and creativity of women is very much needed, not only to make the world a better place, but to ensure their survival in years to come. That was what Simona said in the panel. There are many lessons, but we must first recognize some realities that may seem obvious or self-evident, while others may really surprise us. The vast majority of women in the world are working. They take part in the informal sector as entrepreneurs, in the public and private sectors, as well as in domestic work and unpaid care. Women have only half the possibilities compared to men to get a full-time paid job. It is estimated that there are 1.27 billion women worldwide in paid jobs compared to 2 billion men. We are talking about a difference of more than 700 million women who do not have the same opportunities as men. Women take on non-remunerated work 3 times as often as men. For us to understand the deep and unfortunate impact of the situation, it is estimated that unpaid care work is the equivalent of $10 trillion or 13% of the world GDP. Sustainable development goals are interconnected and interdependent. The panel emphasized the multiple relationships that exist between the objectives developed in Goal 5 on gender equality and the empowerment of women with Goal 8 to promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth, as well as full and productive employment and decent work for all, men and women alike. The relationship between this debate and Goal 10 is clear in that it seeks to reduce inequality within and between countries. I am convinced that the economic empowerment of women should be viewed not only as a goal in itself, but as a means for the implementation of the other objectives and goals we have proposed in the 2030 agenda. The panel proposes 7 principles and 7 guiding actions. As basic principles, we assume that no woman should be left behind and that nothing be done for women without the participation of women, and that we should focus equally on the rights and profits. Empowerment is not only the right thing, it is the intelligent roadmap towards human development, growth, and business promotion. Thirdly, we must address the root causes of economic gender inequality based on gender inequalities in society. And we must address the respect of internationally agreed standards. And finally, we must recognize the need to work in partnerships and global compliance in all countries. To achieve global empowerment of women, the panel recommends the following. First, break stereotypes, transform and challenge the rules which limit women's access to work or devaluate the work performed by women. Changes in those rules must be the priority in order to expand women's economic opportunities in the framework of the 2030 Agenda. We must level the playing field for women, guarantee labor and social protection, while also reforming discriminatory laws and regulations. 155 countries worldwide have at least one law that prevents women from developing economic activities. This must be changed. This contributes greatly to the economic growth, and it's a simple step that all governments can take. And finally, as a social co-responsibility, we must invest in care, recognizing, reducing, and redistributing unpaid work in this field. We must ensure decent work conditions for domestic workers. One of the first steps to achieve this is to ratify ILO Convention number 189. I urge countries that have not yet done so to do it. To guarantee an adequate distribution of digital, financial, and physical goods. This is also important. We need governments, the private sector, and civil society to take actions to ensure that trends and innovations in digital technologies and finance, as well as legal reforms in the field of tenancy and land ownership, expand women's opportunities. Change culture and the way we do business in order to create opportunities for women. As a minimum, businesses should follow the ILO conventions along with national legislation regarding gender equality in order to eliminate discriminatory practices, create opportunities through government, improving practices in the public sector, both as employer and supplier of goods and services. We should establish, implement, and promote public policies that benefit women in poverty and vulnerability, as well as macroeconomic policies to guarantee their rights and generate sustainable and inclusive work. Make women's voices heard, encouraging a greater participation in leadership and business and political decision-making posts. In order to arrive at these measures, it's imperative that we improve data collection and evidence relating to the economic empowerment of women. The UN has many organizations, ILO, development banks, and countries and organizations have been making considerable efforts to create new methodologies and measurements in the widest variety of variables pertaining to the economic empowerment of women. The most important thing that will happen is that the panel will issue, and I'm saying this to heads of state and government who are listening, the heads of state and government who are listening today should know that the most important aspect of the panel, which should issue a second report next year, is everything that we are able to bring in our countries as a result of its findings, detected good practices, principles, and recommendations. We invite the states capable of implementing the HLP recommendations to do so and become laboratories in this implementation. The world has many crises to deal with, but we can and must promote and ensure changes that will transform the lives of thousands of women and girls. It is an imperative call to action. I am certain that this will benefit not only women, but also our societies at large. It's something we must do as a necessary step to ensure that this is done. This is the best path for our planet. Together, humanity can effectively adopt the new models of sustainable development that allow us to survive as a species. It fills us with immense pride that the Paris Agreement negotiations were led by a Costa Rican woman, Cristiana Figueres, Executive Secretary of the Convention, until the beginning of last July, a woman with immense diplomatic capabilities who showed us that when we work together with commitment and focus on the common good, we are able to restore hope and work towards a better world. The Paris Agreement must enter into force immediately, and we have an obligation to increase our ambition as time passes. This is the reason why Costa Rica has made every effort to complete its domestic approval process and will soon join the list of countries that have ratified it. We therefore aspire to become a laboratory for the deep decarbonization of the world economy and a green hub for management, innovation, and transfer of knowledge with early action built upon existing achievements. With our intended nationally determined contribution, we ratified our own national aspiration to steer the economy towards carbon neutrality by the year 2021 as part of the pre-2020 voluntary actions, and we've strengthened our long-term commitment towards deep decarbonization of the economy. The compensatory effects of our forests are accompanied by emissions reductions in critical sectors such as transport, livestock, and waste. We have set an absolute emissions limit of 2030, which is equivalent to a 25% reduction in emissions compared with 2012. Our aspirations also include the promotion of our social inclusion and development programs so that our focus reaches beyond the traditional focus in silos, and we move towards an integral development model which is fed through multidimensional measurements of progress that go beyond the entry requirement. For this reason, on September 9th, the heads of the 3 state branches, representative of many sectors such as local governments, social and religious organizations, academia, gather to sign the National Pact to meet the SDGs. Our planet needs our care, and this care must be all-encompassing. Costa Rica is fully committed to processes that, in the UN framework, seek to protect oceans and marine resources, in particular the development of a new international agreement for the protection of more than 60% of marine biodiversity in international areas, according to Goal 14 of the 2030 Agenda. Mr. President, Costa Rica does not cease to be shocked by the terrorist attacks, which, as we know, unfortunately occur somewhere in the world practically every week of the year. We would like, again, to express our absolute and unequivocal condemnation of all forms and manifestations of terrorism, no matter who perpetrates it, where, or with what aim, as well as the need to bring those who commit these acts of terrorism to justice. The fight against terrorism must be framed in a strict observance of international law, including human rights law, international humanitarian law, and international law on refugees. In this context, we think this is the right time to make a respectful request to countries that have not yet done so to ratify the Arms Trade Treaty without further delay. The diversion of arms to extremist groups could be substantially reduced if more states were to implement the provisions set forth in this multilateral legally binding instrument. Costa Rica follows with profound concern the constant launches of missiles and nuclear testing by the DPRK, the most recent one being on September 9th. In addition to voicing our strongest condemnation and rejecting these types of actions which represent a serious threat to peace, stability, and the regional and international security, we must demand that North Korea stop these punishable acts which unequivocally violate relevant resolutions of the UN Security Council, including the most recent one, Security Council Resolution 2077 of this year, 2016. Costa Rica also wishes to reiterate the importance of fighting impunity for criminal atrocities. Such rendition must be promoted comprehensively at the highest level. We express congratulations for those initiatives that promote a code of conduct restricting the use of the veto in the Security Council in cases of outrageous crimes. We feel that the act must be fully implemented, and we hope for full reestablishment of relations between the U.S. and Cuba and the measures announced by the highest authorities of these two friends concerning political dialogue and openness. In this spirit, we reiterate our support and think the time has come to pay greater attention to the systematic, almost unanimous, demands of the international community in favor of doing away with the economic, trade, and financial blockade of Cuba. The time has come. We welcome the signing of peace agreements in Colombia and the ceasefire declaration of last August. Not only does this bring to an end the oldest armed conflict in the region, but also contributes to peace in all Latin America and the Caribbean. We hope this agreement will allow the government and our Colombian brothers and sisters to plan their future development through a peaceful path. We stress the fact that the General Assembly has the power to define the term of office of the next Secretary General through the appointment resolution. We will continue to advocate that the term be a single term of 7 years without the possibility of re-election, with the conviction that this shall facilitate the exercise of leadership free from the coordination required to set in motion an electoral process designed to secure a second term. It is fundamental for Costa Rica that there be a democratization of the Secretariat. Therefore, the Security Council's endorsement of more than one candidate increases the inclusivity, transparency, and most importantly, the legitimacy of the process by means of the vote. We will continue to advocate that a woman should, for the first time in history, occupy the office of Secretary General. We have reached a new milestone in history by having 6 extraordinary women, including a Costa Rican, as candidates for the position. The transformation demanded by humanity requires new sensibilities and new forms of leadership. My goal is that my daughter, Ines, who is 10 years old now, will be able to tell her descendants about a strange former era where women did not earn as much as men for the same task, that this was a remote era where they were not equal owners of the means of production, where the care of children was a charge largely reserved for themselves, and where their sexual and reproductive rights were not safeguarded. That strange and remote era is one we have to leave behind. Just as we are gradually leaving behind such scourges as slavery, discrimination in all its many forms, consumerism, wars as the basis of economy, which is destroying our shared home, Mother Earth. We can overcome hatred, violence, and inequality. We can achieve peace. We can draw the path to sustainable and human progress. We just need to believe that it is possible and that making it happen is really in our hands. Thank you.